It was an ordinary day, or so I thought, the kind of day when everything seems to fall into place, and life just ticks along like a well-oiled machine. But there are moments in life that turn everything upside down. Moments when a single action or decision can change everything you thought you knew about a person, about yourself, and about the boundaries that once felt so clear. My name is Laura, and I've been married to Mark for almost 15 years. We've built a life together, a family. Mark is everything I ever wanted in a partner. He's dependable, loving, and has a way of making me feel safe in a world that can often feel so uncertain. We have 2 children, Emily and Jason, but it's my son, Jason, who this story revolves around. I love both of my children, but there's something about Jason that makes him feel like the center of our little universe. He's smart, athletic, charming, and always had a way of keeping everyone around him at ease. Jason's father, Mark, and I have always had an open and honest relationship from the very beginning. We've had a clear understanding about what we both value, respect, trust, and boundaries. We made sure that the lines between parenting, marriage, and personal space were always clear. And we both understood the importance of maintaining a healthy, balanced relationship with our kids. But things aren't always as they seem. It all started on one of those quiet Sunday afternoons. Mark had gone out to run some errands, and I was at home doing the usual household chores. Jason had been acting a little off lately, but I chalked it up to him being a teenager, going through his own personal struggles, as teens tend to do. He had been more distant, spending a lot of time in his room, often with the door closed at first. I didn't think much of it. I knew his friends were going through some changes, and I figured that was just part of growing up. But one afternoon, everything changed. I was sitting in the living room when I heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Jason came down, looking a little disheveled. His eyes were a bit red, and there was a nervousness in his step that immediately put me on edge. He walked toward me, avoiding eye contact, and sat down on the couch next to me. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I immediately knew something was wrong. Jason wasn't the type of kid to ask for a serious conversation unless something was bothering him. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, my heart racing as I wondered what was going on in his world. What followed was a conversation that I will never forget. Jason confessed something that completely shattered everything I thought I knew about my son. He had crossed a boundary, one that no mother ever wants to hear about, and worse, it was with someone I knew, someone I trusted. It wasn't just a simple mistake or a moment of confusion. It was an intentional act, a decision that would change our family forever. Jason had been involved with someone outside our family, someone who had been close to us for years. At first, I couldn't process what he was saying. My mind raced with disbelief and confusion. As I tried to make sense of the words coming from my own son's mouth, I wanted to deny it, to tell myself that this couldn't be true. But deep down, I knew it was. It felt like a betrayal. Not just of me, but of the family we had worked so hard to build. I felt nauseous, betrayed, and incredibly hurt. How could this happen? How could Jason, my son, do something so unimaginable? It was a violation of trust, an invasion of boundaries that I thought were impenetrable. As Jason spoke, he explained that this wasn't something he planned or intended to happen. It was an impulsive decision, driven by emotions and circumstances. He hadn't fully understood at the time, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. The pain of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. I told him that this wasn't something I could easily forgive, and that I needed time to process what he had said. I needed time to think about how to move forward, both as his mother and as a wife. How could I ever look at him the same way again? How could I ever forget what had just been revealed to me in the days that followed? Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. I struggled to keep my composure around Mark, knowing that the weight of this secret was something that was slowly unraveling the fabric of our family. Jason continued to act distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that lingered in the air. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But I knew that for the sake of our family, I needed to confront Mark. I needed to tell him the truth. Even though I wasn't sure how he would react, the thought of destroying the life we had built together was unbearable. But I knew I couldn't keep this from him any longer. When I finally told Mark what had happened, his reaction was one of shock and disbelief, just like mine. He was silent for what seemed like an eternity, and then he said something that I will never forget. "We have to fix this." For Jason, for our family, that moment marked the beginning of a long and painful journey for all of us. We sought therapy, as a family and individually, to help us navigate the emotional turmoil that had been caused. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I wanted to give up, when the weight of the betrayal felt like it would crush me. But I couldn't. I had to keep going. For my son, for my husband, and for myself, the process of healing took time. And it wasn't linear. There were moments of progress, and then moments where it felt like everything was falling apart. But through it all, we learned the importance of boundaries, of trust, and of forgiveness. I had to learn to forgive Jason, not for his actions, but for the pain that those actions caused. And in doing so, I found a way to forgive myself for not seeing the warning signs sooner. This story is not just about betrayal, but about the importance of family and the strength we can find in the most difficult moments. It's about understanding that even when boundaries are crossed, it doesn't mean that all is lost. There is hope, there is healing, and there is redemption. But it takes time, effort, and a willingness to rebuild what has been broken, and so, we continue to move forward. Our family is not the same as it once was, but we've learned to grow together, to face our struggles head-on, and to support one another through the darkest of times. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it, and through it all, I've learned that even when my son crossed a boundary, there's always a way to heal, to rebuild, and to find our way back to each other. As the days passed, I found myself questioning everything. How had I missed the signs? How had I failed to recognize the subtle changes in Jason's behavior? It felt as though I had somehow failed him as a mother. I had always prided myself on being an attentive, caring parent, but now I wondered if I had been too focused on keeping the peace, too blinded by the comfort of routine. It wasn't easy to confront these feelings. The guilt weighed heavily on me. Mark and I spent countless hours talking, processing, and trying to make sense of what had happened. It wasn't just about Jason's actions, it was about the choices we, as parents, had made. We both knew we had a responsibility to guide our children, to help them navigate the complexities of relationships, boundaries, and respect. But in this instance, we had both missed the mark. During this time, Jason began to withdraw even more. He seemed to carry an invisible burden, one that was eating away at him. He'd try to hide it behind a facade of indifference, but it was clear he was struggling. It broke my heart to see him like that. This wasn't the same confident young man I had watched grow up. This was someone who was lost, weighed down by regret and shame. Mark and I decided that the best course of action was to give Jason the space he needed to process everything while still making it clear that we were there for him. We let him know that he wasn't alone, and that we loved him unconditionally, no matter the mistakes he had made. But we also made sure he understood the gravity of his actions. He needed to take responsibility, not only for what he had done but for the impact it had on our family. One evening, after dinner, Jason came to me and asked if we could talk. He had finally gathered the courage to face the reality of what he had done. As we sat down together, he told me how deeply sorry he was for crossing the line, for hurting me, and for breaking the trust we had. His words were sincere, but there was an underlying pain in his voice that told me how much he regretted what had happened. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom, he said, his eyes filled with tears. I don't even know what came over me. It was a mistake, and I'll spend my whole life trying to make it right. It was in that moment that I realized just how much Jason had grown. Not just physically but emotionally. He was no longer the carefree boy I once knew. He was becoming an adult. With the capacity to understand the weight of his actions, I could see the remorse in his eyes, and it was a moment of clarity for me. I wasn't just his mother. I was his guide, his protector, and I had to help him find his way back to the right path. I took a deep breath and said, I know, Jason. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but we have to work through this together. Trust is something that has to be earned back, and that's going to take time. But I'm willing to do that. We're a family, and we'll get through this, one step at a time. Jason nodded, grateful for the chance to make amends. It wasn't an easy conversation, and there were still many moments of uncertainty. But I knew this was the first step in our healing journey. We both understood that this wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. The road ahead would be long, and there would be challenges along the way. But I had faith in my son, and I had faith in our ability to rebuild our family's foundation. Over the next few weeks, we continued to go to therapy as a family. Jason's progress was slow but steady. He began to open up more, not just about the incident, but about the pressures he had been feeling, pressures that in some way contributed to his decision to cross that boundary. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation, one that helped me understand his actions better. I began to see that this wasn't about a single moment of weakness, but about a complex series of events and emotions that had built up over time. During one of our therapy sessions, Jason finally said something that hit me hard, but also gave me hope. He said, I've realized that I can't change what I did, but I can learn from it. I want to be someone you can trust again. I want to be the son you thought I was in that moment. I realized that Jason wasn't the same person who had walked into the living room that day, confessing his mistake. He was someone who was ready to take responsibility and make things right. And that was the turning point. Mark and I also worked on rebuilding our own relationship. The trust that had been broken between us needed to be repaired too. We had always communicated well, but this event forced us to dig even deeper, to confront the difficult emotions we had been avoiding. It was a reminder that no relationship, even the strongest ones, is immune to challenges, but it also showed me that, when two people are committed to each other, they can work through anything together. There were days when I felt like giving up. There were moments when I questioned whether we would ever be the same again. But as time passed, I saw the changes in Jason, and I saw the growth in our family. We had learned, through pain and heartache, the importance of communication, of trust, and of boundaries. It wasn't just about moving on from the past, it was about learning from it and becoming better because of it. As we continued to rebuild our lives, we found a new sense of strength, one that came from facing our struggles head-on and choosing to grow through them. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but I knew that we had learned something valuable through all of this. We had learned that boundaries, once crossed, can be rebuilt, and that love and trust can be restored, even after the deepest betrayals. In the end, it was a painful journey, but one that brought us closer together. Our family is not perfect, and we may never be the same as we once were. But we are stronger, more resilient, and more connected than ever before. And for that, I am grateful.